Some of you have already met Chrisa Lowneya on the previous discussion. He's here as an author of many books published also in Polish. One of them is Heroic Leadership, Heroiczne Przywództwo in Polish, and the other one, the title is different. The English title is Make Today Matter. It was recently published by WAM publishing house. In Polish it's Stać się na więcej. I highly recommend those two books. There is one I didn't bring on Pope Francis, which personally is my favorite. I'm a journalist. I work for DEON.pl website. My name is Karol Wilczyński, and I will ask Chris a few questions. And after that, I will give you the floor, and you will be able to ask him. Chris is an economist, and he used to work for J.P. Morgan, and he's a leadership consultant, and currently he's a vice chair of board of Commonspirit Health, which is a Catholic institution. Yeah. Okay. Chris, so you have resigned from your job in banking, and now you manage a Catholic institution. We've heard a Choi presentation on making decisions. So can you tell us more about how did you make this specific decision that you quit one job
to leave the bank?
Yeah.
So as he introduced, after school I was a Jesuit for a few years. Then before I was a priest, I left the Jesuits and I worked at J.P. Morgan for many years. And now you're asking the question. So at some moment I left J.P. Morgan and began writing and so on, and what about that? Huh? And before I answer the question, let me ask, for those who are listening in English, the pace that I speak is okay for you? Okay. And I see some of our friends are listening in Polish. It comes at the right speed also? Okay. So leaving J.P. Morgan, I worked at J.P. Morgan altogether about 17 years. And for the last of those years, mostly I was outside the US. I lived in Japan for a while, then Singapore, and then London. And during that time overseas, eventually I came to the conclusion that I would, when I was assigned back to New York, move on to the next step in life. And your question is, what about that decision? And, you know, like many decisions, it combined many elements, some of which are practical, and some of which maybe are more, what could we say, noble or something. You know, on the practical side, let's be honest, if I thought that I was going to be the chairman of J.P. Morgan in 5 years, probably I would stay 5 years longer, you know. So one aspect is, you know, what is my own trajectory in this place? And also, I observed, because I was outside the US for many years, I observed many times that when people were sent back to New York, often they would quickly become unhappy and leave, you know. And I decided I wanted to avoid this fate for myself. And why was that? Why did they become unhappy? I think for a lot of people, you go overseas and in some ways it's very stimulating. You know, you're interacting with people from many different cultures, and well, sometimes it's a pain in the neck because you're saying to yourself, why don't these Polish people behave the way I behave, you know? But ultimately, you understand it makes life very interesting and rich to understand your own culture, to understand another culture, to understand how you behave that you think is normal, quote unquote, but it's only American, you know? So many people who were sent from New York to these other offices, had a very positive experience, and then you go back to New York, and once again, you're one person sitting in a building with 10,000 people, and, well, I think people liked me a lot. I know people liked me, the managers. But I also had a very strong understanding that one day, if I die at my desk, people will feel badly, but then they will drag me into the hallway and someone else will be in the desk, you know. So this is the practical side. But now also, I guess the question you're asking is a more profound, you know, what about that? And, you know, I guess I felt I was happy at Morgan. I thought it was good work. But I also felt if I'm 70 years old and the only thing I could say about my life is I worked in JP Morgan for 50 years, will I feel like this is a meaningful way to have used my life, you know? And life had given me the luxury to do other things. And so I felt somehow that I have to take advantage of that to think about a next step in life. And I guess because he's my owner, my publisher, or related to the publisher, somehow he's also asking indirectly, is there any Jesuit secret sauce that you could say about decision making? And I would say this, that one of the things that I think one of the great insights that St. Ignatius has about decision making, and I will say it in a practical way, not in a religious way, is that he says you also have to pay attention not just to facts. Here's plus and minus, here's how much money I make, all this, but also what's going on inside here. In other words, I oversimplify incorrectly, but just to illustrate, if you're feeling somehow unsettled, unhappy for a long period of time, maybe this is somehow an indication you have to think about something, you know? And if on the other hand you're feeling somehow some peace, then maybe that's a good indication. And so I took some time to make that decision. In other words, you cannot, his insight would be, you cannot, that doesn't happen in 20 minutes. You know, you cannot say, oh, I have a busy day, let me sit down, see how I'm feeling, 20 minutes later I decided. You know, so one of his ideas is, if you have time, many times in life, we do not have time to make a decision. In JP Morgan, most decisions we had to make in 15 minutes. But in life, should I marry the person? Should I change jobs? We have the luxury of some time, and he says we should use it and pay close attention to what's going on inside you. So in this respect, I did take the time, and I could say I used to daydream purposefully, if you can imagine what I'm saying. Like imagine, well, what if I did that? What would this be like? What if I stay at Morgan? What will it be like? Can you imagine what I'm saying? Like just imagine the different possible outcomes and not just thinking about it intellectually, but also somehow what's going on inside here as I think about these different possibilities. And of course, if some of us are religious people, then if you're a religious person, also to pray about the decision.